Hello everyone, hope you are doing well. So today in this lecture we'll study about disaster and disaster management from both perspective GS1 and GS3. So if you see disaster, disaster came in GS1 also and GS3 also. Any disaster, the geographical phenomena and causes of any disaster came in GS1 part, that is geography, and disaster preparedness, mitigation and prevention came in the GS3 part of our paper, that is disaster management. So in this video we'll discuss about both perspective GS1 and GS3. So first I'll discuss the basis of DM, that is disaster management, the basic part of disaster management. After I'll take one by one each disaster, cover holistically the geographical phenomena part, causes, then the distribution, then I'll cover the impact of each disaster. After that, mitigation strategy for each disaster, and then steps taken so far for that disaster. So let's proceed with our lecture. So what is disaster? If you see, disaster was no longer a new concept or a new phenomena. They are been from the ancient time. So disaster as ancient as human histories. What happened? Earlier we considered disaster as an act of God. So earlier people considered disaster as an act of God. After that, act of nature. When the rationality came into reasoning and rationality came into, then people start questioning that why this happening, what are the geographical phenomena behind this disaster. So then came the act of nature, that disaster is an act of nature. After that, act of society. So what happened today? There was man-made disaster. Man-made disaster. So now the society was responsible for the disasters. So now the disaster was considered the act of society. So this is the evolution of disaster. Evolution of disaster. So first disaster considered an act of God, then the act of nature. After the reasoning came and when the rational came, when people start questioning that why this is happening, and after that the act of society, because now the disaster are mostly the man-made and the anthropogenic. That's why this is the act of society now. So this is the evolution of disaster. So now what is disaster? So disaster is So what is disaster? So disaster is a serious disruption. Serious disruption that affect the material, economical and environmental losses, and also exceed the community's ability to cope up using their on resources. So disaster, you have to remember the three keywords. That first, disaster is a serious disruption. Second one, that it impacts the material, economical, environment losses, and also it affect the exceed the community's ability to cope up using their own resources. When the community doesn't cope up with the disaster, doesn't cope up with the hazard, then this came the disaster. For an example, so let's disaster. One is, we have to remember that disaster is a serious disruption. Second, it affects the community and functioning of society. Also affect the material, social, economical, and environment losses, and also exceed the ability of cope up of its own resources. So when this happens, we can say there is a disaster. For example, let's take an example of heat wave. So if a person have AC in their room, AC in car, AC in home, so what happen? The capacity to cope up with heat wave is high. So for that person, this may not be a disaster. But when we consider an outdoor laborer, so they are more vulnerable to disaster. They doesn't have ability to cope up using their own resources. For them, this is a disaster. So according to NDMA, a disaster is defined by the NDMA, National Disaster Management Authority, is a catastrophic event causing serious disruption to the functioning of community or society, involving widespread human, material, economic or environmental losses that exceed the affected community ability to cope using its own resources. So it's a serious disruption and that exceed the community's ability to cope up using their own resources. So this is disaster. So in disaster, so in the basic of disaster management, we'll talk about what is disaster and some key terms related to disaster. After that, we'll talk about the DM cycle, that is disaster management cycle. After that, the institutional framework of disaster management in India. And then we talk about the international efforts for disaster management. Then we'll talk about each one by one, each disaster, specific disaster holistically. So now we'll know what is disaster. So after disaster, there are type of disasters. So there are two type of disasters. Either you can make this flowchart or a table. Type of disaster. So there are two type of disaster. One is natural disaster. Second is man-made or anthropogenic disaster. You can also use this geographical disaster, meteorological disaster, biological disaster, climatological disaster. You can also differentiate in this type. So type of disaster, one is natural disaster. From geographical perspective, geographical disaster, that is earthquake, tsunami and volcanic related to the interior of the earth. Then the hydrological disaster related to water, that is flood, urban floods. Then there is meteorological disaster, there is a cyclone, there is a cold wave, there is a hot heat wave. Then came the anthropogenic disaster, which is biological disaster, biological accident, chemical accidents are there, and there is chemical spill, nuclear and radiological emergencies. So these are the anthropogenic disasters. Now we'll study each one by one each disaster. Earthquake, tsunami, every disaster we'll cover in this lecture. After that, there was some key term related to disaster management. So first is hazard. What is hazard? So what is hazard? So hazard is a natural event. It is a natural event have potential to harm. So hazard is a non-certain event. It is a non-certain event. So it might harm or it might not harm, but it had potential to harm or losses. So what happened? In case of hazard, it is non-certain. It may cause harm or may not cause harm. May or may not cause harm. So how disaster is differentiate from hazard? What happened? In hazard, there is potential to harm. So it may harm or it may not harm. But in disaster, it is certain. In disaster, that is certain. So there is losses. There is harm in disaster. So that is disaster and hazard. So hazard is a natural event that have potential source to harm and damage, and it is non-certain, may or may not harm the losses. But on the other side, what is disaster? Disaster is a serious disruption, and disaster is serious disruption. Serious disruption and certain means it potentially harm and it will harm. It potentially harm and create losses of environment, material, social, environment losses. So this is disaster. This is a differentiate between the hazard and the disaster. That hazard is a natural event that have potential to damage and potential to harm the community and the society, but disaster is a certain, it will harm the society and the community. Now came the type of hazard. Type of hazard and type of disaster are the same. The frequency of harm is different. So disaster, type of disaster, one is natural disaster, anthropogenic hazard, and then the natural hazard. So type of hazard, so it may harm the community or society, or it may not harm the community or society. So they are non-certain events, but the disaster on the other side is a certain event that will harm the society and the community. Now came the other concept that is known as vulnerability. What is vulnerability? See, what is vulnerability? Vulnerability is susceptibility. Vulnerability is ability to absorb shock of the disaster, and the susceptibility to be effectively affected by the hazard and depend upon the capacity to cope up. See, if an area have good capacity to cope up with any disaster, then it is less vulnerable. And if an area having less capacity to cope up with any disaster or a hazard, then it is more vulnerable. So that is vulnerability is the ability. So the word is kitna. कितना कोई एरिया, कितनी किसी एरिया की कैपेसिटी है टू डील विद द डिजास्टर एंड द हजार्ड. सो दैट इज द वनरेबिलिटी. वनरेबिलिटी यू कैन से इट इज द एबिलिटी टू एब्जॉर्ब शॉक, और इट इज द ससेप्टिबिलिटी टू बी अफेक्टेड बाय द हजार्ड. सो इट डिपेंड अपॉन द कैपेसिटी. if the capacity is high, capacity to cope up with the disaster is high, then the vulnerability is less. And if the capacity to cope up with any disaster is less, then the vulnerability is high. For example, coastal areas are more prone to cyclone because the vulnerability of the coastal area is high to the cyclone. So this is vulnerability. So there are type of vulnerability. Now came the type of vulnerability. See what happened. Now I told you the hazard. I told you the vulnerability also. So what is disaster? When the hazard plus vulnerability. So this is hazard, this is natural event, and when it overlap with the vulnerability, it shape into disaster. And also it depend upon the capacity. If the capacity is high to cope up with any hazard, then the disaster risk is less for that community or for that society. And if the capacity is high, then if the capacity is less, then the vulnerability is high and the disaster risk is also high for that community or a society. So this is a relation between the disaster, hazard, vulnerability and capacity. Now there is a type of vulnerability. So there are 5 type of vulnerability. One is economic vulnerability. So what is economic vulnerability? See, if there is poverty, if there is lack of income in community or society, then this community or society is more vulnerable to the disaster. So it leads to the economic vulnerability, that is poverty and low income make people more vulnerable. For example, you can say the migrants in COVID-19. Then the physioclimate vulnerability, that is related to the physical location of any area. Some locations are more prone to disaster, some areas are more prone to disaster, that depend upon the physioclimate vulnerability. For example, I told you the Himalayan regions are more vulnerable to earthquake and landslides. So this is physioclimate vulnerability. Then came the social vulnerability. So some people like elderly, children, SC, OBC, SC, these people are more vulnerable because they have lack of access of resources. So this is came into social vulnerability. Then came the environment vulnerability. See what is happening? We are disturbing the nature. We are constructing the dam. So what happened? The people living nearby the dam construction are more vulnerable to the disaster. So it is known as the environment vulnerability when the human interference with a natural process make people more vulnerable. Then came the attitudinal vulnerability. So attitudinal vulnerability is some people have a negative attitude towards the disaster management. So they say कि क्या होगा देखा जाएगा, nothing will happen. So these people are more vulnerable when the disaster came. So this is attitudinal vulnerability. Then the one another term is that is known as risk. What is risk? So risk is the expected losses by the hazard. So what are to be expected losses by that disaster, by that natural event, by that the hazard. So risk is hazard into vulnerability, and one term is this exposure, that how much exposure of that hazard and the disaster. So what is risk? So risk is losses, that how much losses will be there if there is a hazard. It also depend upon the vulnerability. If the vulnerability is high, then the risk is also high, and it also depend upon the exposure. If the exposure is high of that disaster, then also the risk is high. So it depend upon the three condition. One is hazard, one is vulnerability, and one is exposure. Suppose the hazard natural event is there and there is impact of that hazard is very high. So there are more risk to the people, to the community of that area. If the vulnerability of that area is also high, suppose this is coastal area or the Himalayan area. So the vulnerability of that area is also high. So the risk of disaster is also high in that area. And then came the exposure. So if the exposure is large, so more people will affected, more number of people will affected, and then the risk is also high due to high exposure. So how will you reduce the risk? You will cut the impact of the hazard, you will mitigate the impact of the hazard, you will take a prevention measure to reduce the impact of the hazard so that the risk reduction is there. Then the vulnerability, if you reduce the vulnerability, then also there is a risk reduction. So you have to reduce the vulnerability. Then came the exposure, and you have to also reduce the exposure of that hazard by installing early warning systems. So in this way, you have to reduce the risk of the disaster, that is risk. Now came, so see, in this way you can draw this diagram, that how risk is dependent on hazard, on vulnerability, and on the exposure part. So this is risk. Now came to the disaster management cycle. See, this is NDMA definition of hazard and vulnerability. I also give that. So there is a comparison between disaster, hazard, and vulnerability. You know that what is disaster, what is hazard, and what is vulnerability now. That disaster, there is a certain losses, there is happening of losses, there is serious disruption, and hazard, hazard have potential source to harm, but it may or may not harm the community or the society. And the vulnerability is the susceptibility of a community or a society to be affected by the hazard or a disaster. You can give example also. So here the Haiti earthquake, 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami. So these are the disaster because they affect the society, they harm the society and the community. Earthquake, volcanic eruption, industrial accident, cyber attack. So they have the potential to harm the economy, but it depends upon the capacity of an community or a society. If they have capacity to cope up, then there is no harm and there is no disaster. Then came the vulnerability, like poor building codes, lack of disaster preparedness. This make a community or a society more vulnerable to the disaster or hazards. So in this way, you can also relate hazard and vulnerability. If there is a hazard and there is a vulnerability and there is no interaction between these two, then there is no disaster. See, if there is a hazard like flood, drought, and there is no vulnerability, so the area where flood is came, or drought is came and no one is living there, so there is no vulnerability in that area, there is no interaction between the hazard and vulnerability, then there is no disaster. But when this overlapping is happening, when there is a disaster and hazard, and there is a vulnerable population is also there, and they are overlapping with each other, then this situation is known as disaster. So this is disaster. So in this way you can present in your answer with neat and clean diagram. Then came the disaster risk. I told you risk also. Then now came the disaster risk. That what is disaster risk? So disaster risk refer to the expected losses due to that hazard happening in a particular area over a specific period of time. So this is disaster risk, which is expected losses due to hazard happening in a particular area over a specific period of time. So risk depend upon, I told you, probability of hazard, the magnitude and the frequency of hazard. If the magnitude and frequency of hazard is high, then the disaster risk on in that area is also high. Then came the vulnerability. If the vulnerability of that area is high, then the disaster risk is also high. And then in the capacity of the community to cope. If the capacity is high of any community to cope with that disaster, then the disaster risk is less in that area. So this is the relation between disaster. So this is a relation between the disaster, hazard, vulnerability, capacity, and one thing is also there, that is exposure. So risk is also depend upon the exposure also. You can also draw this diagram of risk, hazard and vulnerability. Now came the DM cycle. See what happened. DM cycle has 3 stages. So when there is any disaster management, so when we talk about the disaster management, one second. When we talk about the disaster management, so there are 3 phases of disaster management. One is the pre-disaster phase. Pre-disaster. Second is the during disaster. During disaster. And third is the post-disaster. So suppose that if there is a disaster in your community or a society, then first phase is pre-disaster. So pre-disaster, we have to avoid that disaster. So we want to avoid that this disaster will not come. How we will avoid that? First is prevention. We'll talk about the prevention strategy, that how we will prevent from that disaster. Then the preparedness, we have also work on preparedness, that yes, some strategy was there that we have to prepare for that disaster. And then is mitigation. So these 3 are came in the pre-disaster phase. We think about the prevention, preparedness and the mitigation. Now suppose the disaster is there. During disaster, what is there? We have to focus on response and relief. So we are giving medical services, we are giving food, we are giving shelters, rescue people. So we are focusing on response and relief approach during disaster. Then came the post-disaster. So in post-disaster, we have to focus on recovery. So we have to recover, rehab and then reconstruct. So we have to focus on these 3 terms, that is recovery, that we have to recover from that disaster. Second is rehab, that we have provide rehabilitation for the vulnerable population. And then the reconstruction, that we have to rebuild rebuild, build back better approach. So there is build back better approach. So we have to rebuild in a better way, so that in future if any same type of disaster came, then we have to work on the reconstruction of that area. So these are the three phases of disaster management of any area. First, work on the pre-disaster stage, then during disaster, and then the post-disaster. In the pre-disaster, we'll avoid the disaster by prevention, by preparedness, and by mitigation. During disaster, we'll talk about the response and relief programs, and then the post-disaster will focus on the recovery, rehabilitation, and reconstruction. See, so in this way, so in the pre-disaster, so in the pre-disaster time, we have to focus on the prevention and preparedness, post-disaster on the response and recovery. See, in the pre-disaster, how will prevent? How will prevent from the disaster or hazard that is coming? So there is land use planning, there is building code, there is public education and sustainable policy. While using this activity, we are able to prevent from the disaster. Then the mitigation strategy, that we have to take some structural measure and non-structural measure, so that we have to mitigate the disaster. Then the preparedness, that we have to prepare for the coming disaster, that is emergency response plan, mock drill, early warning system. Then during disaster, there is response, so search and rescue program, medical care, shelter, food. Then the post disaster, there is a recovery from the damage. And then the reconstruction, that we have to rebuild critical infrastructure that was damaged from the disaster, and we have to build back better. Then came the disaster risk reduction framework. See, I told you the disaster risk. So disaster risk is dependent on three parts. One is hazard, one is vulnerability, and one is capacity, and fourth is exposure. So you know this term, what is hazard, what is vulnerability, what is capacity, and what is exposure. So now the disaster risk reduction framework, if the question came on disaster risk reduction framework, so you have to generate point on this line. So how you reduce the impact of hazards? So what will you do? See, disaster risk reduction framework. So you have to generate points on disaster risk reduction framework, that how will you reduce the disaster risk. So here you will think on this line. One is hazard, that disaster risk is dependent on hazard. Then there is a vulnerability. Then there is a capacity. And then there is a exposure. So first you have to reduce the disaster risk by reduce the impact of the hazard. How will you reduce the impact of hazard? So there is, we use the word hazard analysis. There should be critical infrastructure. Then the vulnerability. How will you reduce the vulnerability? Here you will use the vulnerability assessment. Then How will you increase the capacity? Because if there is more capacity in community and society, there is less risk reduction. So there is less disaster risk. So how will you increase the capacity? By capacity building programs, capacity building, capacity building programs, by training, by work on R&D, research and development. So in this way you will increase the capacity of the community or society. Then how will you reduce the exposure? So here is early warning system, use of technology for better rescue operations. So in this way you have to generate the point. So you have 1 point, 2 point hazard analysis, creation of critical infrastructure. For vulnerability reduction, there is vulnerability assessment. For capacity building, there is training program, there is work on research and development. And for exposure, for reducing exposure, there is early warning system, and there is use of technology for better rescue and relief operation. So now see the points. See, these only the points that are written for disaster risk reduction framework. One is hazard and vulnerability risk vulnerability analysis. Second is policy towards the risk management. Third is risk awareness and preparation for risk mitigation. Then the early warning system, and then the use of knowledge. So this is our DRR framework, that is disaster risk reduction framework. Disaster risk reduction framework. So if you know what is disaster risk, you are able to write on disaster risk reduction framework on this line: hazard, vulnerability, capacity and exposure. Now came on the disaster management in India. So in India, disaster management in India. So in India, there is Disaster Management Act 2005. This is the legal mandate for the disaster management in India. So the Disaster Management Act of 2005 marked a significant advancement in institutionalized mitigation, preparedness and resilience. See what happened before 2005. Before this act, we are more focused on relief and response approach. So earlier we are focusing on the relief and response approach, but this act is a paradigm shift from relief and response approach to prevention, mitigation and resilience approach. So now the act, when act came 2005, DM Act, it changed the approach from relief and response to prevention, mitigation and resilience approach. So in this act, see, this is our institutional framework for disaster management in India. If you see at the top level, there are two bodies. There at the top level, there are two decision making bodies. One is Cabinet Committee on Security and one is National Crisis Management Committee. So it controls, command and coordinate for disaster management. This National Crisis Management Committee. So this is top level decision making body. After that, all control gave to Ministry of Home Affairs. Under this Ministry of Home Affairs, so at the top level, so there is CCS and there is NCME. then Ministry of Home Affairs. Under that there is National Disaster Management Authority. After that there is State Disaster Management Authority, and after that there is DDMA, there is District Disaster Management Authority. So this NDMA is a apex body which formulate plans, guidelines and coordinate for disaster management. So under NDMA there is State Disaster Management Authority, and under State Disaster Management Authority there is District Disaster Management Authority. After that there is one institution also, National Institution on Disaster Management. It is capacity building. It is for capacity building of disaster management. Then there is a special forces also. Specialized forces, that is National Disaster Forces, Task Forces. Then there is institution also for capacity building, that is National Institution for Disaster Management. Then there is fund also, that is National Disaster Rescue Fund. It is for financial assistance. So this is our institutional framework for the disaster management. At the top level there is CCS and National Committee for Disaster Management. Then at the under the Ministry of Home Affairs there is National Disaster Management Authority, there is State Disaster Management Authority, and there is DDMA. What this National Disaster Management Authority makes a plan, formulate guidelines and coordinate between these three institutions. Then there is another institution for capacity building for disaster management, that is National Institution for Disaster Management. Then there is National Disaster Relief Forces also, that is specialized forces for disaster management. And then there is a separate fund for financial assistance to disaster management, that is National Disaster Relief Fund. So this is the institutional framework for disaster management in India. So one thing is left, that is National Executive Committee. So this is the Executive Committee of NDMA. So this is National Executive Committee. So this is the executive body that implements the national disaster management plans. So it works under the NDMA. Now what happened? If we see at the institutional level, at the international level, so there is a Sendai framework for the disaster management. So at the international level, what is happening in 1991, there is UNSDR, and from 2005 to 2015 there is Hyogo Framework for Action for Disaster Management, and after that there is a Sendai Framework from 2015 to 2030 for disaster management at the international level. So before the Sendai Framework in India, there is Disaster Management Act 2005, which established National Disaster Management Authority and the State and Local Disaster Management Authority. After that, there is a National Policy on the Disaster Management 2009, The legal mandate for this plan is Disaster Management Act 2005. After that, there is on the international level what is happening. There is a Hyogo framework for action from 2005 to 2015, and India aligned with this Hyogo protocol. This Hyogo protocol is aimed for build resilience in community by forcing on risk. Now came after Sendai framework. After Sendai framework, there is National Disaster Management Plan 2016, which was revised in 2019. So there is NDMA Plan 2019. So this aligns with the Sendai priorities. After that, the Prime Minister 10-point agenda on disaster risk reduction, and after there is National Cyclone Risk Mitigation Project. This is ongoing, and there is strengthening of community resilience. So these all came after the Sendai framework that happened in 2015. Now we'll see one by one what is National Disaster Management Plan. We'll also discuss the Sendai framework. So now, what is National Disaster Management Plan 2019? See, National Disaster Management Plan 2019. It is a framework and direction to government. So it talk about the roles and responsibilities of ministries and department in the disaster management. So it talk about the roles and responsibility of each department and ministries in disaster management of India. The base of this disaster management plan, that is National Disaster Plan 2019, is DM Act 2005 and NDM Policy 2009, that is National Disaster Management Policy 2009. So these NDMA plans have two things. One is pillars and second is measures. So in NDMA Act, there were 6 pillars. One was the roles and responsibilities of ministries. So first pillar is roles and responsibilities of ministries and the department. Second, it in line with the Sendai framework. It also in line with the COP21, that is Paris Agreement, and then the SDG, that is Sustainable Development Goal. So it aligned with all these Sendai framework, COP21 and SDG. Then the third pillar is social inclusion. Third pillar is social inclusion, that it work on social inclusion. Social inclusion, that all people were taken part in disaster management. Then the fourth pillar is PM 10-point agenda, and the fifth pillar is integration of disaster risk reduction in development. See, if now the development is happening, so in the development there is an integration of disaster risk reduction framework, so that we have to develop sustainable disaster infrastructure. So we'll work on the disaster resilient infrastructure. So these are the major pillars of NDMA plan 2019. Now now we'll talk about the measures. See, when we talk about the measure of NDMA, or when the question came on the NDMA guidelines, we have to think about these 5 to 6 points and generate points according to the question. So first is First measure is understand risk. So how will you understand risk? You will talk about the hazard, you will talk about the vulnerability, you will talk about the capacity. So it is HBCA approach. So it is HRBCA approach. You will follow this approach for understanding the risk. You will understand the hazard risk. You will understand the vulnerability. You will understand the capacity of that area. So how will you reduce the risk? Think about how will you reduce the risk. You will do the hazard zoning. For hazard reduction, you will you will develop the early warning system for exposure reduction. Then you will also use this word vulnerability assessment for vulnerability reduction, and then the dissemination of data and the information for this understanding risk. If there is data, if there is information, then the understanding of risk is better than the risk mapping. So use these 4-5 points in this understanding risk. After that, you will think about the second point, that is interagency coordination. So for the national disaster management, we have to do this interagency coordination. So we know that there is NDMA, there is state disaster management authority, there is local disaster management authority. So there should be better coordination between this interagency for the better disaster management in India. So we have to talk about the disaster governance. If there is better coordination, there is good disaster governance in India. And we will talk about the responsibility matrix also. Then the third point, we'll think about the disaster risk reduction. So in this way, in this part, we divide in this structural and non-structural measures. So for disaster risk reduction, first you have to think about the structural measure. Structural measure में क्या आएगा? For like critical infrastructure like ecosystem development. So these came in the structural part. And in the non-structural part came laws, rules, guidelines, policy making. So these all came into the non-structural part. So we'll think in line with the structural measures and the non-structural measures. Then the sixth point is capacity building. How will you increase the capacity? So by training, by mock drills, by research and development, you will increase the capacity of the community or a society for better disaster management. Then the climate change adaptation, that is fifth point. We have to integrate the climate change with the disaster management. We'll talk about the sustainable development goal and also climate change impact assessment. So these 5 points we have to think while writing the NDMA guidelines for any disaster. After came the Sendai framework. See, Sendai framework came in 2015, and this framework is non-voluntary agreement that from 2015 to 2030, implemented by UNISDR, and it is a successor re-instrument of Hyogo framework. Before this, there is a Hyogo framework for action for disaster management, which is from 2005 to 2015, and after that there is a Sendai framework from 2015 to 2030. We have to remember that it is non-voluntary agreement, but it's talk about the 7 global targets. What are these 7 global targets? So the PYQ is also there for these 7 global targets. So they are 4 increasing. So in this 7, there are 3 increasing targets that we have to increase and 4 reducing targets that we have to reduce. So the first target of this Sendai framework was reduce global mortality by 2030, that we have to reduce the global mortality by 2030. So these targets are from 2015 to 2030. So all target will finish in 2030. So reduce global mortality rate by 2030. After that, reduce number of affected people by disaster by 2030. Then they reduce direct disaster economic losses by 2030 and reduce disaster damage to critical infrastructure by 2030. So these are the 4 reducing global target by the Sendai framework. First, we have to reduce the damage of critical infrastructure by 2030. After that, if we reduce the damage of critical infrastructure, then there is automatically reduced direct disaster economic losses by 2030. And there is, if there is less economic losses, there is less vulnerability. So the number of people affected by the disaster was also less. So automatically reduce number of affected people by 2030. And if there is less number of affected people by the disaster, there is automatically reduction in the global mortality rate. So in this way, you have to remember these 4 reducing global target of Sendai framework. First, you have to reduce the damage of critical infrastructure. Second, you have to reduce the economic losses. Third, you have to reduce the number of affected people by the disaster. And fourth, you have to reduce the global mortality by 2030. Now the 3 targets are increasing. What are these? First is enhance institutional infrastructure. So first target is enhance institutional cooperation. Second is developed early warning system, and third is increase number of countries with local disaster strategy. So these 3 target are increasing target. First, you have to develop early warning system. Second, you have to increase the number of countries which have local disaster management strategies. And third was the enhanced institutional cooperation for the better disaster management in countries. So these are the 7 global targets by the Sendai framework. 4 was reducing targets and 3 was increasing targets. There was also 4 pillar of Sendai framework, which was in line with the National Disaster Management Plan of India 2019. See, you have read the NDMA guidelines. NDMA 2019 measures. So these 4 priority areas of Sendai framework are in line with this NDMA measures. So what was the first NDMA measure? That was understanding risk, and the first priority of Sendai framework is also understanding risk in all dimension. Then we then think about the second point of National Disaster Management Plan measures was the interagency coordination. Then the third point on disaster risk reduction, we have to take some structural measure and non-structural measure. So investing in disaster risk reduction. So these priorities also in line with the National Disaster Management Plan. Then the third priority is enhanced disaster preparedness. So the fourth point is capacity building, so which automatically enhance disaster preparedness for community or society. So it will this priority is also in line with the National Disaster Management policy. Then the strengthen disaster governance, and then the fifth point is climate change, and the interagency coordination will also strengthen the disaster governance. So these all 4 priority was in line with our India's national NDMA 2019. So we have to remember these 4 points, and that NDMA 6-point measures. And on this line will generate every point in disaster. So if the question came on NDMA guidelines, we'll think about these line, these 4 points and 6-point measure, and generate 7 to 8 points on NDMA guideline. If the question about the measures, then we'll also generate these same points. If the question is about the mitigation strategies, then also we have to think on this line, these 4 priorities of Sendai framework and the 6 major points of National Disaster Management Act 2019, and then we have to generate points if the question came on NDMA guidelines, measure, mitigation, solution. So these points are written in that question. So now we'll discuss one by one each disaster from both the perspective, from the geography perspective and from the disaster management perspective. See, first we'll take the disaster earthquake. So first we'll talk about the geographical phenomena of earthquake, that what are the causes of earthquake, what are the geography behind this development of earthquake. Then we'll talk about the causes, both causes, natural causes and man-made causes. Then we'll talk about the data and distribution of earthquake. Then in earthquake there was joining also. We'll talk about this. Then we'll talk about the impact of earthquake. What are the impact of earthquake? And then we'll talk about the mitigation strategies and NDMA guideline for earthquake. And then after that we'll discuss about the steps taken so far for the earthquake mitigation. So in this way we'll talk about each disaster: earthquake, landslide, cyclone. So let's talk about the earthquake. So what is earthquake? So what is earthquake? Earthquake is sudden shaking of earth. So it is a geographical phenomena, and that is sudden shaking of earth caused due to movement in the earth crust, which release some amount of energy in the form of wave that travel in all direction. So what happening? So earthquake. So why earthquake came? So we know that earth is made up of different plates. So if this is earth, so there are different plates. So earth is made up of different plates, and when these plates move, the movement of these plate generate a seismic pressure in earth crust. Seismic pressure in earth crust. So when these plates are moving, either convergent, either divergent, or pass away from each other, so what happens? There is a generation of seismic induced pressure in a earth crust, which impact the folds. So there is an increase in the pressure on these folds, and due to this pressure there is release of energy. There is release of energy in the form of waves. So there are two type of waves in which this energy is released. One is the body wave and second is the surface wave. So when this energy is released, energy released in form of wave. So there are two type of wave. One is body wave and one is surface wave. So from the name it is clear that what is body wave and what is surface wave. And in the body wave there was two. One is primary wave, that is P wave, and one is secondary wave, that is S wave. P wave and S wave. So these are in the body of the earth crust. So these are the body wave. Surface wave are of also two types, that is relic wave and love wave. So what happened? See, suppose this is earth crust. So this is earth crust. What happened? Due to these movements of plate, they induce a seismic pressure in earth crust, and there is fault in earth crust. So suppose the seismic pressure induced in a earth crust, then this pressure impact the fault in the earth crust. So these release the energy in the form of wave. So at point at which the energy start releasing and moving towards all direction is known as the focus of earthquake. Focus of earthquake. It is also known as the hypocenter. Hypocenter of earthquake, from where the energy start releasing. And the point above this hypocenter on the surface of earthquake, this is the surface of earthquake, surface of earth. So the point above the hypocenter on the surface of earth is known as the epicenter of earthquake. Epicenter of earthquake. So this energy is released in the form of wave in the all direction. So these waves are of two type. One is primary wave and second is secondary wave. So what is P wave and what is S wave? That is secondary wave. So the P wave are moving towards the parallel of the direction of propagation. Direction of propagation. See what it means. See, suppose, so this is the direction of wave and the P wave is moving parallel to the direction of wave. So this compression, so these waves are moving in this direction parallel to the direction of propagation, so in the direction of the wave only. So this will result into compression of the area. Then talk about the S wave. S waves are perpendicular to the direction of propagation. So they are moving towards the perpendicular to the direction of propagation. See, if this is the direction of propagation, so these waves are moving perpendicular to the direction of propagation and moving to and from. So these, if we see the destructive part, so P waves are less destructive and S waves are more destructive, because these are the perpendicular to the direction of propagation. They are moving to and fro, like in this way. They are moving like in this way. So they destruct more. And P waves are the parallel to the direction of propagation, so they are moving in this direction. So they are not moving in up and to and fro direction. They are moving in the straight parallel to the direction of propagation. So there is a compression and release of the area. So compression and expansion is done from P waves. Expansion and compression. So first difference is this, that this is parallel to the direction of propagation and this is perpendicular to the direction of propagation. Second is compression. They are moving and done compression and expansion of an area, and they move to and fro like in this direction. P waves are travel in all direction and passing through liquid, solid and gas, but the S waves are passing only through solid. So these are the major difference between the P wave and the S wave. When this wave, see, this is Earth, suppose this is Earth. So this is Earth and this is hypocenter. This is hypocenter of earthquake, and just above this hypocenter on Earth there is epicenter, epicenter of earthquake. See the, one second. So this is Earth, this is hypocenter of earthquake. So the energy start releasing from this point under the earth crust. So this is hypocenter. The point just above the hypocenter on surface is known as epicenter, epicenter, and energy start releasing in the form of wave, which is known as body wave, and body wave of two type, one is P wave and one is S wave. So what happened? When this wave came on the ground of the surface, there is a generation of new wave which is known as surface wave. Surface wave. So these waves are known as surface wave when these body waves came into the contact of surface, and these waves are converted into surface wave. These surface waves are most destructive. Most destructive because they are moving not just parallel, also perpendicular and rolling in direction. So these are the most destructive wave that cause the destruction on the earth's surface. So this is all about the earthquake geographical phenomena, that why this earthquake is happening, because of the movement of plates. So earth crust, on the earth crust there was number of plates made up of different plates, and when these plates are moving either convergent, either divergent, either transform, what happen? There induce a seismic pressure in the earth crust which release in the form of energy, form of wave known as P wave and S wave. Together they are known as body waves. So see, this is the point where the energy start releasing is known as hypocenter or the focus of earthquake, and the point just above this on the surface of earth is known as the epicenter of earthquake. See, I told you what is body wave, what is surface wave. Now see the what are the causes of earthquake. So first cause is tectonic plate that I told you. Second cause is volcanic eruption. When the magma came out of earth crust, see, when the magma came out of this volcano, it also induced some pressure on the, some seismic pressure, induced seismic pressure in earth crust, which result sometimes into earthquakes. So the volcanic activity is one of the cause of earthquake. Then the landslide and avalanches also. See, when the landslide is happening, it also induce some seismic pressure on earth which result into earthquake. So landslide and avalanches are also one of the cause of earthquake. So these are the natural cause of earthquake. One is tectonic movement, second is volcanic eruption, and third is landslide and avalanches. Now came the anthropogenic cause of earthquake, because now what happened, the frequency of these earthquake are increasing, and there are some anthropogenic causes, that's why this frequency is increasing. One is dam construction. See what happened, due to this dam construction or due to this large reservoir construction, there is increased pressure on the underlying fault. So in the earth we know that there was fault, and due to this dam construction and large reservoir construction, what happened, it induced the pressure on this underlying fault, which result in earthquake, and this is anthropogenic caused earthquake. Then the underground nuclear test, so this also induced seismic pressure in earth crust, which led to earthquake. Third is the geothermal energy extraction. So this also, geothermal fluid from the earth crust can lead to induced seismicity by altering subsurface pressure and permeability. So when this geothermal energy extraction is there, it also induces some seismicity in the underlying fault, which also cause earthquake. Then came the hydraulic fracturing. So injecting fluids into the ground at high pressure to extract oil and gas can induce seismic event by altering subsurface pressure and lubricating fault lines. So what happened, due to for this oil and gas extraction, what happened, we introduce this fluid by high pressure, and this high pressure impact the seismic event in the earth crust, which result into earthquake sometimes. And fourth is and the last point is mining. So these all are the anthropogenic cause of earthquake. One is dam, underground nuclear test, geothermal energy extraction, hydraulic fracturing, and mining. So these are the all causes of earthquake. So we are done with the geographical phenomena. We are done with the earthquake causes of earthquake. Now came the distribution of earthquake. So India is divided. We know that. So India is divided into 4 seismic zones, from 2 to 5. 4 seismic zones from 2 to 5. So the zone 5 is more vulnerable to earthquake. So this zone 5 contains the area of Jammu Kashmir, Uttarakhand. See, this is the map. So zone 5 are the most vulnerable for earthquake. So this zone 5 contains some area of Jammu Kashmir, Uttarakhand, some northeastern state, Gujarat. So these some areas of India are came in zone 5, which was the most destructive area of earthquake. So zone 5 is the very high risk zone. Area are more liable for shaking intensity. Then the zone 4 is high risk zone. Zone 3 is moderate risk zone, and zone 2 is low risk zone. So these are the seismic zoning in India for earthquake. So we know that 60% of the land area of India is vulnerable to seismic hazard damage. So this is a data of India's vulnerability index, that 60% of land area are vulnerable to earthquake. So this is our earthquake vulnerability of India. Now talk about the impact of earthquake. So when you will think about the impact of any disaster, you will think on this line. One is human impact, economic impact, social impact, environment impact, governance impact, and there was secondary hazard also that came, like from earthquake there is a secondary hazard, there is a risk of landslide, there is a risk of floods also. So these are the secondary hazard which have impact. So when there is a question on impact of any disaster, either earthquake, cyclone, so these points are same for all disaster. So if the disaster came, there is loss of life, there is loss of property, there is loss of there is economic losses, there is social losses. So think about this, think on these lines. One is human impact. So there is a loss of life due to building collapse. So if there is a question on earthquake, so what you have to do, point should be same. You have to take that point according to question. So if the question is on earthquake, you will same write the point human impact, loss of life, and due to building collapse, falling debris. So these are the cause of earthquake. So from earthquake, what is happening? There is building collapse, there is falling debris. So so first point is loss of life. Second is economic losses. There is impact on critical infrastructure. There is loss of critical infrastructure. So in economic impact, you have to think about the economic perspective, that what are the economic losses happening due to any disaster. So there is impact on the infrastructure damage. There is bridge damage, roads damage, airport damage, property loss is there. Third is the social impact. So there is there is a social impact also. You know that there is social inequality in our society. People like elderly, children are most vulnerable to the disaster because of lack of access resources. So there is loss of shelter, there is loss of education, there is social inequality increase, there is migration also because the people are migrated for the safer reason. So these are the social impact of any disaster. Then the environmental impact also. So due to that earthquake, there is a chances of landslide, there is a chances of floods, there is a chances of avalanches also, there is a chances that the river course is changed. So these all are came under the environment impact of earthquake. Then came the governance and institutional impact. See, in this you have to, so these are the common points for every disaster. One is the emergency response strain. So when the disaster is there, you have to think about the governance impact of that disaster. That is emergency response strain is there. That's why the disaster is there. Coordination challenges also. There is lack of interagency coordination also. Urban vulnerability exposed, there is more vulnerability in that area. And the rehabilitation issues also, there is rehabilitation rescue issues also. So these impact you have to write in every disaster. Then the mitigation. So when you talk about the mitigation or NDMA guidelines, I told you generate points. Mitigation of mitigation strategy or NDMA guidelines. So you will think about that 6 major and 4 priority of Sendai framework. The first one is talking about the understanding risk. So for that you have to generate point that earthquake mapping is already there. So earthquake micro mapping is needed. Okay. Then second, there is development of early warning system. Third, there should be vulnerability assessment. There should be dissemination of data. Then you also have to write risk reduction, data collection and management. Data collection and management. So in the first point only, understanding risk, there are 5 to 6 points that are common for every disaster, for every NDMA guidelines, for any disaster. So these are 4 to 5 points that you have to written in every mitigation strategy or NDMA guidelines. Then the second point is interagency interagency coordination. So in this we will talk about the disaster governance, that we should improve the overall disaster governance. We should talk about the responsibility matrix, that there should be development of this responsibility matrix for better disaster management of earthquake. Then the third is disaster risk reduction. So in this point you have to think on two lines. One is structural measures and second is non-structural measures. So in structural measure you have to think about the critical infrastructure. So what is the critical infrastructure that we have to develop for the better mitigation strategy for earthquake? So here is seismic resilient infrastructure. Seismic resilient infrastructure. There is concept of retrofitting. Retrofitting. So in the structural measure, you have to write about the economic ecosystem development and the critical infrastructure development. In the non-structural measure, you will think about the rules, rules, guidelines, policy making. So rules, guidelines, policy making, policy revision. So these points are there for non-structural measures. So till now we have 7 to 8 points for mitigation strategy. Now the fourth point of NDMA measure was capacity building. So fourth point, you have to think about the capacity building. How will you develop the capacity? By training, by doing the mock drills. So write about the mock drills, write about the R&D in disaster management. So in this way capacity development is there. Then the fifth point is climate change adaptation. So talk about the integration of development and DRR, that is disaster risk reduction framework, that we should integrate disaster risk reduction framework into development. Then there you should think about the climate change adaptation assessment for better disaster management. Then you will talk about the SDG, sustainable development goals. So in this way you have 12 to 13 points that you have to write in your mitigation strategy or any NDMA guideline, because the NDMA guideline is talk about this only. So let's see the points. So mitigation of earthquake, building codes, retrofitting, early warning system, emergency preparedness, land use planning, insurance, seismic hazard assessment, public education, critical infrastructure. So these all points we also done in that area NDMA. So think about that line. This will be very easy to generate point in this type of question. So NDMA guidelines, and the earthquake resistant design, seismic retrofitting. There is regulation and enforcement for the interagency coordination. There should be good regulation, there should be good enforcement of policy, there should be good disaster governance. So all that point you have to write here. Awareness and preparedness, then the capacity development and emergency response capacity. So these are the NDMA guidelines for earthquake. Now steps taken so far. So these you have to remember for each disaster, that what steps taken so far for each disaster. So we are doing earthquake. So what are the steps taken so far for earthquake? So there is National Earthquake Risk Mitigation Project, that is ongoing project. So first you have to write about this. National Earthquake Risk Mitigation Project. It is centrally sponsored scheme launched in 2013 under NDMA, implemented by NDMA. These aim to strengthen the structural and non-structural earthquake mitigation efforts and reduce the vulnerability of high-risk districts. Then the second is National Center of Seismology. So the waves, the earthquake. So in earthquake, the waves are measured by the seismograph. Seismograph. So you know that there was two scale for this. One is Mercalli scale and one is Richter scale. The magnitude of any earthquake is measured by the Richter scale, and the intensity of the any earthquake is measured by the Mercalli scale. So the National Center for Seismology, it is an office under the Indian Ministry of Earth Science, and the office provides earthquake surveillance, hazard report to government agencies. So this is also the step taken by our government, that is National Center for Seismology, which will provide the earthquake surveillance, and it is under the Ministry of Earth Science. Then the third is India's Quack. So it is a mobile app developed by this National Center for Seismography for real-time information dissemination of earthquake. So we know that there is a this app. In this app, the SMS is came on these earthquake information. Then the fourth point is National Retrofitting Program. This program is came in 2014 based on the NDMA guidelines. So these are the steps taken by so far for earthquake. So these you have to remember. Now came the another disaster, which is known as landslide. So what is landslide? So what is landslide? Landslide is the movement of mass, debris. So it is a movement of mass of rock, debris, earth down a slope. So down a slope under the influence of gravity. So see, if this is a mountain, this is a slope. So if any material, any rock, any debris came down to the slope under the influence of gravity, is known as landslide. So landslide is a type of mass wasting only, which donate any downslope movement of soil, rock under the influence of gravity. So the Himalayas are more vulnerable to landslide. So we know that Himalayas have steep slopes, so they are more vulnerable to this landslide. And one of the reason is also there is a tectonic plate movement also. You know that our Indian plate and the Eurasian plate are still converging. So the collision of Indian and Eurasian plate, the northward movement of Indian plate at 5 cm per year towards the Eurasian plate. So what happened due to this? It also built a stress on this particle, on this rock, on this debris. So these induce also landslide. So these induce earthquake, and earthquake indirectly induce the landslide also. So the Himalayan region are very much prone to this landslide. So what are the causes? So there is not much in landslide for in the geographical phenomena of landslide. So we know that the landslide are due to this steep slope of Himalayas and the movement of rock debris under the influence of gravity. So what are the causes? Fragile rock and steep slope is one of the causes of the landslide. Then the second is heavy rainfall and the cloud burst is one of the cause also. See what happen if there is heavy rainfall. So if there is a heavy rainfall, Suppose this is a mountain. This is a mountain and there is a heavy rainfall. So what happened due to this heavy rainfall? The mass wasting is enhancing. The weathering of rock is there, and due to that there is more chances of landslide. That after weathering, what happened, these masses of rock and debris move under the influence of gravity. So cloudburst, heavy rainfall is one of the cause of landslide. Then the earthquake and tremor. So when there is an earthquake, there is also pressure on these underlying rocks on the slopes, which induce landslide. So earthquake is one of the cause. Then the snow melt, glacier retreat, and glacial lake outburst floods are one of the cause of landslide. So these are the natural cause of landslide. What are the anthropogenic cause of landslide? That the deforestation and loss of root binding. See what happened. This is mountain. See, this is mountain and this is trees. So due to deforestation, what is happening? These trees are gone. So these trees have soil binding capacity. So they bind the soil by their roots. Due to their absence of this tree, what happening? There is less soil binding. Less soil binding is there, and the rock and debris are more prone to the landslide now, because there is deforestation is there. There is road cutting and tunneling and hydropower project is there. See what happened due to that. This is mountain. If we cut this mountain from here, suppose that we cut this mountain, from here and make a road. So here this is more vulnerable to landslide. Now the underlying mass of rock and debris will came under the influence of the gravity. So this is also cutting road cuttings, and this tunneling hydropower projects are also one of the source of landslide. Then there is mining, and there is unplanned urbanization and agriculture on slopes. So if there is some who is doing agriculture on this slope, and underplanned urbanization also induce the chances of landslide also. So these are the major causes of landslide. One was the natural cause was two natural cause was very big. One was the rainfall, heavy rainfall or cloudburst, and one was the fragile rocks and steep slopes. And the anthropogenic causes was deforestation, unplanned urbanization, road cutting. So climate change is also one of the major cause of this landslide. What is happening due to this climate change? The monsoon is impacting. And due to that there is erratic monsoon is there, and there is extreme rainfall event was there, and which induce landslide also. So climate change is one of the cause of landslide. Then the landslide vulnerability. If we see the landslide vulnerability, so there was the zone according to the vulnerability of landslide. So there is very high vulnerability zone, then there is high vulnerability zone, and there is moderate to low vulnerability zone. So if you see the map of India, so if you see the map of India, so these region, the Himalayan region, the northeast region are more prone to this landslide. The Western Ghats are also prone to landslide because there is steep slope mountains and there is heavy rainfall. In the Western Ghat, what is happening? So there is a difference between the vulnerability of Western Ghat and the vulnerability of Himalayas landslide vulnerabilities of Himalayas and landslide vulnerability of Western Ghats. See what is happening in Himalayas. Landslide are due to earthquake, due to tectonic plate movements, due to fragile rocks, due to steep slopes. But what is happening in Western Ghats? The landslides are more due to high rainfall. So in the Western Ghats there is rainfall induced landslide is there. So there is a difference between the landslide vulnerability of Western Ghat and of the Himalayan region. So very high vulnerability in this, what the Himalayan region is there, the Andaman Nicobar region is there, the Western Ghat is there, and the Nilgiris is there. But the cause of vulnerability here is different in the Western Ghat and Nilgiris and in the Himalayas. Then the high vulnerability zones are there. All of the Himalayan state from the northeastern region except the plain of Assam. Then the moderate to low vulnerability zone, there is Aravalli, there is Rajasthan, Ladakh, Spiti, Western and Eastern Ghats and the Deccan Plateaus. So these are the zoning of vulnerability of landslide. You can also make this map. So this is the high vulnerability. So here the high vulnerability, very high vulnerability of landslide. Then there is a high vulnerability. So yellow color is of high vulnerability. Then the pink color is of moderate vulnerability. So in this way you have to make a neat and clean map of India by showing the landslide vulnerability. So according to 16% of area of India is vulnerable to landslide. So this is a landslide assessment of India in which 16% of area is vulnerable to landslide. Then the impact of landslide, see same. On impact, you will think about what? You will think about the human impact, you will think about the economic impact, you will think about the environmental impact, you will think about the governance impact, and you will think about the secondary hazard which is happening due to that event. So human impact, there is death, there is loss of life. Economic impact, there is loss of property. Then the social impact, there is loss of service, there is migration. Then the environmental impact, see what is happening due to landslide, there is more soil erosion is there. So one impact is soil erosion. There is river blockage is there, because what is happening when there is a landslide, see this is a river, so this material is accumulated in river. So the mass of rock and debris were accumulated in river, which blocked the river. So there is a river blockage. So due to this river blockage, what is happening? There induce a chances of flood. So there is secondary hazard is there, which is flood due to this landslide. Then the governance, so same point, strain on disaster response, exposure to poor planning and building codes. So these points are same for every disaster, that is governance impact, human impact, economic impact, social impact and environmental impact. So now came the mitigation. So same, think about the mitigation. One, you have to think about the understanding risk. So what are the risks? So here you have to show the vulnerability assessment. There is hazard mapping, there should be development of early warning system, there should be dissemination of data and information. So all that point in underline risk. Then there should be interagency coordination, there should be better disaster governance, and then structural measure and the non-structural measure. So here you have to, in the structural measure, you will think about the what are the critical infrastructure that reduce the landslide. So here is it. Here is so in the structural part, structural part, you will think about the critical infrastructure. So how will you reduce this infrastructure? So you'll talk about the construction codes. Think about the construction codes. They should be ban on construction activities in hilly area. Construction activities in hilly area. They should be terrace walls. See if this is mountain. So terrace wall is this. See, this is road. If there is, if you cut this rock and make a road, so what you have to do, you have to make this wall so that the big boulders of rock doesn't came out of this. So in this way you have to write about the critical infrastructure solution in the structural part. Non-structural part, that you have to formulate a landslide mitigation policy or landslide mitigation management plan. You have to make rules for construction. There should be no construction in the hilly area, in a landslide fragile area. So all that point came in the non-structural part. So after that, the capacity building, there should be training, there should be research and development in landslide fragile area, there should be there should be mock drills, so there should be better rescue operations, and after that the climate change adaptation policy is there. So all that point are came in the mitigation. So NDMA guidelines for hazard. So first, understanding risk. So there is a point on hazard zone, there is a point on early warning system, there is area specific solution, hazard mapping. After that, the structural measure, restriction on construction, road building and large settlement in highly vulnerable zone, large scale afforestation program. Then the code, that this is non-structural measure, codes for evacuation and construction, establishing arrangement for landslide insurance compensation and promoting terrace farming in northeast area. So these are the NDMA guidelines. So if you know that 6-7 criteria that you have to think, this is very easy to generate point in disaster management. Now steps taken so far for the landslide. So first step taken was National Landslide Risk Management Strategy 2020. So this you have to remember these steps taken so far for each disaster. So first step is taken by us, that is National Landslide Risk Management Strategy 2020. Then if you don't know anything, then always write this NDMA guidelines. We have NDMA guidelines for every disaster. Then the ISRO, there is a Bhuvan portal and landslide atlas 2023. So these you also have to remember these facts. Now came the another disaster, that is flood. So what is flood? So flood is a state of high water level along a river channel or on the coastal that led to inundation of land. So what is flood? Why flood is happening? So see if this is a dry area. This is a river, this is a dry area, this is land, dry land, this is river. So what happened when this level of river increases? So the water came into this dry area and the inundation of land. Inundation means land डूब जाती है. Inundation of land is happening, and this condition is known as flood. Or there is another definition also, when the natural precipitation is increased, then there is also a chance of flood. When the drainage system is less and the natural precipitation is very high, then also there is a chances of flood. So this is one natural reason. This is second natural reason, that the water level of river is high. So this is also one reason. So these two are the natural reasons of flood. So there are anthropogenic reasons are also for flood, that is lack of sewage or lack of drainage system. Third is lack of drainage system. So if there is lack of drainage system or lack of sewage system, then there is more chances of flood also. So flood is a, first is there is a high level in the high water level in the river that led to inundation of land. One is this reason. So India is highly vulnerable to flood. Out of total geographical area, that is 329 million. So out of total geographical area of India, 40 million hectare area is flood prone area in our India. So this is the vulnerability of India towards the flood. Then the type of flood. So there are many type of flood. One is riverine flood. See, riverine flood will talk about when there is overflowing of river due to water level rise in the river. So overflowing river or streams which led to inundation of the surrounding land. So this is riverine flood. Then there is flash flood also, that is rapid onset flood often caused by heavy rainfall. If there is natural precipitation is very high, if there is very high rainfall or there is a cloud burst, then there is a flash flood. Then what is coastal flood? So what happen if there is storm surge is there, if there is cyclone is there, so what happen, there is thunderstorm clouds are there on the coastal area. These thunderstorm clouds led to heavy rainfall in the coastal area, and which led to the coastal flood occur on the coastline due to storm, cyclone or high tides. So these are the type of floods. One is riverine floods, second is flash flood, and third is coastal flood. Then the dam and leaf break flood also, which is also we'll discuss in glacial lake outburst flood. What happen if this is a lake and this is the leaf? So this is the leaf. If this leaf is break, so what happened? This water came out, and what happened? There is inundation of land around the surrounding area. So this also dam and leaf break flood. So this is a fourth type of flood result in the failure of dam or leaf. So what are the causes? Natural cause, I told you, there is heavy rainfall, there is river factor, there is glacial meltdown, there is storm surge and tsunamis. Then the human induced causes was there is deforestation, then is encroachment of floodplains and waterlands also, there is dam failure, unplanned development, road, mining, sand removal. All these are the human induced causes of flood. Now the climate change factor is also there. So due to climate changes, what is there? Monsoon is impacting, there is erratic monsoon, there is heavy rainfall, so there is more chances of flood. So reason prone to flooding in India. So this is the area liable to the floods. So the Brahmaputra river region is very vulnerable to the floods. The Ganga river region, the northwest region, and the central and Deccan river. So the Brahmaputra river is prone to flood, that is northeastern region. This is due to heavy rainfall, or the water level rise in river and streams. Then the Ganga river system, then the northwest river system, that was northwest is Indus, Chenab, and the central and Deccan system. So there is a Narmada, there is a Godavari. So these rivers are also sometimes prone to flood due to climate change, due to anthropogenic cause, and due to natural cause also. So these are the areas. So you have to draw this map on lands, on floods. Then the impact. So same impact, I'm not reading it again. So same impact you will think about on this line: human, social, environment, governance, and secondary hazard. Then you will give examples also. There is an example of floods: 2013 Uttarakhand floods and 2018 Kerala floods. Also Wayanad floods you have to mention here. Wayanad floods. So there is all Bangalore urban flood. So urban flood is another next topic. What is urban flood? Before that, there is what is the mitigation of flood. So think about that line only, understanding risk. So there should be early warning system, there should be river placing planning, there should be floodplain zoning. So all that came in the understanding risk part. Then the flood forecasting and modeling, embankment and flood control structure, that came into the structural measures, climate change adaptation, and the international collaboration. Or you can write about the capacity building, you can write about the non-structural measure, you can write about the framework for the flood management strategy. So all these are the mitigation strategy. So what are the steps taken so far? One was the Abda Mitra scheme. So this is very important, you can quote it anywhere. So Abda Mitra scheme by NDMA has approved the centrally sponsored scheme. So it is a centrally sponsored scheme focusing on training community. So it is basically a capacity building initiative, that is Abda Mitra scheme, training community volunteer in disaster response in the 30 most flood prone districts of 25 states in India. Then the second is National Flood Risk Mitigation Project for mitigation and reduction in risk, severability and consequences of flood. So these are the two steps that so far is taken by us for flood mitigation. So this diagram also, need of the hour is integrated flood management. See, flood is happening due to, first there should be या तो heavy rainfall हो रही है, otherwise their river water level is rising, or otherwise is anthropogenic causes. So these are the causes of floods. So these require a integrated approach for the flood mitigation. That is, there should be good land use management. So there should be good land use management. There should be good water resources management. There should be integrated water management plan, and there should be risk management for that, for the flood management. So there is the integrated flood management is there. So you can make this diagram also. After that came the concept of urban flood. So urban flood, what is urban flood? So what is urban flood? So we can see this urban flood is rising. So you can see the in the recent year there has been increasing trend of urban flood disaster. Why this is happening? See, urban flood is not just the natural cause. The urban flood is different from the riverine flood. Why it is different? See, in the urban area there is urban activity, there is urban construction, there is urban emission, which led to urban heat island or a concrete jungle. So this is the impact, which is urban heat island effect, due to high heating in urban area, due to lack of green space in urban area, due to large scale urban emission. What is happening there, create a heat loop in the urban area, which is known as the urban heat island. And due to this urban heat island, there is formation of formation of clouds in urban area due to this urban heat island. So due to these clouds, what happened? There is more rainfall also, and due to this there is also lack of urban governance. See, in the urban area, one concept is there is a urban heat island. That's why the rainfall in the urban area is rising. So there is heavy rainfall in the urban area. One reason. Second reason is the lack of the urban governance. So in the urban area, the governance is lacking. What is happening? There is chalk drainage system in the urban area. So there is not well developed drainage system is there. So there is chalking of drainage system. There is under regulated construction is there. So due to that, the urban flood is there. So the consequences is urban flood. So on the one side there is heavy rainfall, on the other side there is chalk drainage system. So all this led to what? There is urban flooding, and the instances of this urban flood is rising. So urban flood in India from the past year, you can see the data. So there is increasing trend of urban flood disaster in India over the past several years. Floods from Chennai, December 2015, then the Kashmir floods, then the Mumbai floods in 2005 and 2006 reflect the vulnerability of our cities for urban cities, basically vulnerability of urban floods. So what are these causes? I told you the causes. One was the causes of encroachment on the natural drains and the river floodplains, improper disposal of solid waste. So solid waste disposal was not good. There is chalk drainage system. There is sudden release of failure to release water from dams. There is dam failure also. The urban heat island effect and the global climate change resulting in increased episode of high intensity rainfall. So the basic reasons was, one is urban heat island impact, second is chalk drainage system, third is lack of urban governance, and fourth is the climate change. So these are the basic causes of the urban flooding. Now what are the mitigation? Same thing on that line only. Mitigation, why, how to mitigate this? So there is a identification of emergency needs. So there should be estimation and identification. Then there should be preparation of well-defined plan for the entire post-flooding response. So you should also talk about the response also. Same point, there is a capacity building, there is a planning, there should be early warning system. All that point came in this mitigation. Now in this type, see, urban flood is basically due to this anthropogenic cause and the climate change impact. So here you have to talk about the way forward also, that what should be done for this disaster. So there should be need for holistic engagement. So there should be holistic engagement. There should be urban flood of this scale cannot be contained by the municipal authorities alone. So there should be inter-agency coordination is there. Then the Metropolitan Development Authority and the National Disaster Management Authority and the State Authority, State Revenue and Irrigation Department. So all work into coordination. So what is required is the coordination is required between the municipalities, between the National Disaster Management Authorities. Then they should be developing spawn city. So there is a case study on spawn city. So there is a development of spawn cities because the urban center is now developing into concrete jungle. So what you have to talk about the spawn city. You can also talk about the wetland policy also. So in this way you have to give 4 to 5 points on way forward, that what should be done for the urban flood mitigation. Then came the droughts. So droughts, this is our next disaster, that is drought. What is drought? See, when there is a area, see this is area, and the average natural precipitation is no more there for a long period of time. So decline in precipitation over a long period of time. So that condition is known as drought. So what happened? Broadly, drought is perceived as a sharply felt water deficit caused by vibration in the natural hydrometeorological factor, uh, agroecological condition, or moisture requirement of crop under prevailing cropping. So what happened? There are four type of drought basically. One is so one is meteorological drought. So this is basically drought I'm talking about, that is meteorological drought. What happen when there is no precipitation on an area over a long period of time, then we say that this is a meteorological drought, that there is no average precipitation is there. So when total precipitation is 75 or less than the average precipitation, then we say that there is a meteorological drought. Then there came the agriculture drought. See what is happening if there is no enough soil moisture to support the growth of vegetation and crop. See, if there is less soil moisture for the crop, then we can say that there is a agriculture drought. So because of that, there is a crop failure. So there is not enough soil moisture to support the growth of vegetation and crop, then there is agriculture drought. Then the hydrological drought. See, when the situation of drying of water, see this is river, this is river. If the water table of that river is less, so the stream or a river is drying up, then we see that there is a hydrological drought. And these three type of droughts are there. One is meteorological drought, second is we have agriculture drought, and third is hydrological drought. So in India, 68% of our country is prone to drought in varying degree. So over 68% of our country is basically prone to drought. And 35% of which receive rainfall between this. So over 68, here you have to draw the map also. So here we'll draw the map of India. So it's a rough map of India. So the basically area of Rajasthan. So here the central India, some central India. So these are basically prone to drought. And this area, Haryana, UP area, these are less prone, but the rainfall is less here. So this is talking about that 68% of India is prone to drought, and 35% of area which receive rainfall up to 750 mm to 1125 mm. So you can also quote this Composite Water Management Index by Niti Aayog, which highlight about that 2 lakh people die in India every year due to inadequate water and sanitation. So what are the causes of this drought? So, what are the causes? Why there is drought in any region? First, that there should be rainfall deficiency, that there should be no average precipitation for a long period of time. Then there should be there should be rainfall deficiency. So one reason for drought is this. Second reason is El Nino impact. So El Nino and La Nino also impact the rainfall in India, also impact the monsoon rainfall in India. So it also impact the drought. So if there is high condition of El Nino, then what is happening? So there is less monsoonal rainfall. So India is almost dependent upon the monsoonal rainfall for agriculture. So they should, if there is no erratic rainfall is there, so there is no monsoonal rainfall which impact the drought. Then the third is Indian dipole, ocean dipole movement. This also impact our monsoonal rainfall. So it also impact the drought condition. Now the delay or erratic monsoon. Of course, these 3 points are almost interlinked with each other. So delayed and erratic monsoon. If there is erratic monsoon, there is no rainfall, no much rainfall in India, and there is a chances of agriculture drought in India. Then the temperature extreme. So what happening due to climate change? There is a the creation of temperature extreme. High temperature and heat wave can increase drought condition by increasing evaporation rate and drying out soil and water sources. So the temperature is rising due to climate change, which also induce the impact of drought. So these are the causes of drought. So impact, I am not telling the impact again. So this is the map of the drought. So these regions, see Rajasthan, some part of Gujarat, some part here in the South India are the most vulnerable for the drought, are most prone to drought. Then they are the impact, same impact. So nothing much in that. Same you have to write that human, economic, environment, social impact. Then the mitigation, same, they should be monitoring, they should be zoning, they should be mapping, they should be early warning system, same point, there should be contingency planning, there should be water management. So there should be capacity building, there should be crop diversification, there should be crop which are less need water. So there is drought resilient crop is there. So crop diversification and resilience. So there should be drought resistance crop variety should be there for the agriculture drought, and there should be social safety net. So these all are the mitigation for the droughts. So in this lecture we'll study about earthquake, we'll study about landslide, we had study about floods, urban floods and droughts. Now we are left with many disasters, like we're left with the cyclone, we're left with the heat wave, we're left with the tsunamis, tornadoes, and some biological disaster, and some crowd disaster also. Crowd disaster, that was stampede. So all these will be covered in next part of this video. So in the next part I'll cover all this disaster. So hope this help. Happy learning.